No, I'm a real vampire. I'm 189 years old. And I said, really? That's interesting. I said, what are you doing out in the daytime then? If you're a vampire, what are you doing out in the daylight like this? She said, oh, we can come out in daytime. We can walk in the daytime, especially on a cloudy day like this. We just don't like bright sunshine. But we can come out and walk around whenever we want to. I said, well, you learn something new every day. I didn't know that. And she said, we're not what in movies and reading books. She said, we're completely different. We're something else altogether.
History remembers the facts, but what about the phantoms that refuse to be forgotten? Welcome back to The Common Historian. I'm Jeremy, and tonight I'm joined by Dr. Dennis Carroll to dig into one of history's darkest legends, the vampire, the truth behind the myth. Let's get into it. Welcome back, Dr. Carroll. It's great to have you back here, and we have a great topic.
Always a pleasure, my friend. Always a pleasure. And we've got a very pleasurable, for me, subject to deal with tonight. Definitely one of my
Yeah.
favorites.
Where would you like to start with the vampire lore?
I've over the years had my own experiences with vampires. Matter of fact, I'm working on a book right now. Hopefully, we'll have it out by the end of the year, and it's called Paracryptidology: Hunting Monsters and Things of Nightmare. And there's one section, one chapter in there that I've titled Vampires That I Have Known. And so I've had, some encounters with this over the years, different cases. And that's what we'll delve into a little bit tonight. On the back of the book, I was going to tell you this interesting little thing. I'm going to have on the back of the book that when you are a child, you believe that monsters are real. Then you grow up to find out they really are. And that's my story. Okay. And by the way, sometimes the monsters are us, or maybe they used to be us.
Yeah.
Kind of a thing about that. And here's what C.S. Lewis said that I always, one of my favorite quotes, the very famous C.S. Lewis said that if you meet something that looks human but is not, or something that once upon a time was human but is no longer, but keep your hand on your hatchet. So what he's saying here is be very careful because things are not what they appear to be, and this is definitely vampire territory, okay, without a doubt, because the vampire, when we've got to establish this at the beginning of our little thing here tonight, there are different types of vampires, just like there are different types of werewolves. I don't know if we've ever did a show on werewolves, but
No, we
they
haven't
are
done
different
that.
types of werewolves. Yeah, we'll have to do something to get into that sometime. There are different types of werewolves, and they're brought about being werewolves by different avenues. So it is with the vampire. There are different types, but there are two major types of vampires we're going to be talking about a little bit here tonight. And one type is the human vampire, and the other type is the inhuman vampire. That is the real, true undead. It is not a living being, not living like you and I are. I hope we're still kicking here. That's a different thing altogether. Now, the human vampires can be like you and me. They're flesh and blood person, people. They want to be vampires, or they like the vampire style lifestyle. They're gothic. They're the goth kid. They enjoy that. Some people actually want to imbibe in other people's blood. There are vampire societies that do this,
Yeah.
but they're human vampires. And when it comes to actual real vampire hunting, which I've done a little bit in my time, you are definitely looking for inhuman vampires. That is what, put it this way. If you encounter a true 100% real vampire, the only way to dispatch them is to drive a stake through their heart, pin them to the earth, decapitate them, and then immolate them with fire. In other words, you burn them to ashes. I would not advise doing this to human vampires, okay, because that's called murder, all right? Don't do that. Not good. But now, inhuman vampires, you can't call it murder because they're already dead, okay? They're not living. They're not a living thing. But most of the time, and we got to understand this as being part mostly also coming from my area of demonology. What you're looking at with an inhuman vampire, let me just say, Jeremy, if you come back as a vampire,
Yeah.
you're not really Jeremy Brunton, okay? Just got your body, and it may even use your mannerisms and your voice, but it's not you. In other words, it's worrying you, but it's not you. It is a reanimated corpse, and it has inside of it demonic spirits that are animating it, making it move, do what it wants to. It's under control of that. In other words, it's very much like your traditional zombie, not the ones that go around eating people. That's the Hollywood zombies.
Yeah.
The traditional zombies are just mindless slaves. They move to the will of their masters. This is so with the inhuman vampire. You have an infestation of demonic entities inside this dead body, moving it around, and it may attack you. It may drain blood from you. It may do different things to you. Okay. Now we got to throw out the window the traditional vampire, the movies. Okay, because folklore and legend paints them completely different in a way of that, because they're not always out trying to drain blood out of you most of the time. There are other vampires that draw energy or draw the soul or the life essence out of you. They feed off of that. The Bible, of course, always says the blood is the life. You hear that quote in Dracula, by the way, too. That comes straight out of the Bible. Life, there is a mystical thing going on with blood. Now, we're not going to get into that. That's a show for a whole nother time, some other night. But there is a mystical thing with blood. And a lot of people think the adrenochrome and all that stuff that's in it. We don't need to talk about that too much because YouTube doesn't like that word. But there's some kind of mystical life essence attraction of the blood. And this is where the vampire comes in. And it could be that this infestation of demonic spirits inside of a person could be out trying to renew its energy of some sort by taking blood or taking life essence. Okay. I've had a lot of cases over the years dealing with these types of vampires. I call them the spiritual vampires, really, because you're dealing with demonic entities. And they are vampire spirits, basically. That's what they are. I'll tell you a case in a few minutes about one that I had an interesting run in with. But nevertheless, you've got the human vampires, and we're not dealing too much with the human vampires tonight because I've never dealt that much with them. I know they exist. I know they have cults and they have covens. There are covens of satanic vampires. Now, the satanic vampire is a human who has become a vampire willingly, just like the werewolf. The real traditional werewolf is not a werewolf because it happens to be a werewolf. It has an origin. It gets its power from demons, from demonic power. These are very evil witches who take on this shape-shifting ability and change into werewolves. Okay, that's your most typical werewolf. And then the other kind of werewolf that's a cursed werewolf. You got the same thing with vampires. You got some people who wanted to become vampires, and they sell out to this darkness, and they actually are shape-shifting and becoming real vampires. And that's part of the witchcraft thing. But then you have people with a vampire curse. People who have this curse maybe in their bloodline, or somebody put some kind of spell on them and turned them into this, or whatever the situation. These are people who are involuntary vampires. They don't want to be vampires. Okay. So you see where I'm getting at. You got a lot of different vampires to cover here, okay, in this respect. Now, I have studied them because vampires are fascinating. I've studied them a lot over the years, and I've had my own cases, and that's what I'm going to tell you a few of them tonight. Now, that first one I'll start off with, I actually got a phone call one day, and it was from another team of paranormal investigators. And they said, Dr. Carroll, we've got a voodoo case. And since we heard a good bit about voodoo, your occult knowledge and all that, and we want to contact you because we don't know anything about voodoo, okay? And I said, that sounds interesting. Tell me what the story is. And said, we know this lady, and she believes she's got a voodoo curse on her and all that. And I said, give me her name and all that, and call her and tell her I'm coming to talk with her, which I did. It was in the town next door to where I'm in, another town right over from where I live. So I went there with another friend of mine and got this lady's story. And here's the way it goes, Jeremy. She said that they owned two houses here. They lived in one house, and the other house was a dog grooming business. Okay. She had a dog grooming business. And her and her husband, they didn't have any children. Okay. But they were very good, seemed like a very nice young Christian couple, and very nice and very respectful. And she told me your story. Said what happened about 3 weeks ago. She said that this Mama Loa moved into the neighborhood. Now, Mama Loa, of course, is a voodoo priestess. Okay, and she lived not directly in front of them, but to the side of their property on another little street there. But I would say you would say she was a next door neighbor. Okay,
Yeah.
kind of like that. And he said this woman come over one day, and she was a very heavy set black woman. And she said this woman that when she come in the shop, here's the interesting thing. This is the first thing that really attracted my attention to this. She said when she opened the door, she said, "Can I come in?" Of course, it's a place of business. That's strange you would ask that. Think about it. How many times you go to Walmart and ask to come in? So, and the woman said, "Yeah, come on in." I'll tell you why. She had to be invited in because they have no power or authority with this stuff unless you've been invited in, okay? That's a typical thing of the vampire, too. But so this woman comes in. She says, "Honey, I moved in the neighborhood and I want to come over and see you. And I brought you some money juice." And she had a bottle of black liquid of some sort. She said, "You put this in your house, you have good fortune and you have a lot of money coming in." And who wouldn't want one of those, right? But anyway, she said, "You keep this handy and you'll have good luck." All kinds of wonderful things that happen. Being a Christian woman, she did not go too much with this, okay? But she wanted to be nice and took it. And I said, that's the one thing you should not have done. Because once you take something, it's yours. And that's what your mom and dad used to tell you. Don't take things from strangers. That's the reason why. One of the reasons why they tell you not to take things like that. Because when you take something, it is officially yours. If I give you a cursed item, it's yours, curse and all, from now on. Unless you pass it along to someone else, which is not nice. Or you break the curse on it. And I've had a lot of that happen over the years and all that. I said, "I wish you hadn't taken that, but where is it? We can do something with it." She said, "I threw it away." I said, "That's second running. I wish you hadn't done that because we could have done something with that." So I said, let me tell you what I'm going to do. And I said, "I'm going to check around your property for a voodoo fetish." They'll leave a fetish sometimes to connect with the spell or whatever it is they're doing. And it's part of the thing. And so I said, "But what makes you think that she could put a spell on you just because she gave you this?" She said, "Up until that day, when that was about 3 weeks ago, said I was doing $10, $12 a day." And she said, "Now I barely do 2 a day and I have to go home and lay down." Said, and she said, "I've been to the doctor. There's nothing wrong with me, but it's just and I'm having weird nightmares. Weird things are happening around the house, both of these houses." And she said, "And I just feel drained. I feel like there's something sucking the life out of me." But boy, when she said that, red flag goes up. I said, "Oh, that don't sound good at all." And I said, "I believe this woman has put a vampire spirit on you. For whatever reason she wanted to do it, that sounds like what she's done." I said, "But don't worry, we can take care of it." I said, "First of all, it's probably, if it is some type of a monitoring spirit, it's probably in this house with you right now." But I said, "Let me go check your property." So I go check her property. I didn't find anything, usually bones or feathers or anything like that. I didn't find anything. And not to say it couldn't have been there. I might have missed it, but I'll try to be thorough as possible.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I go back and I tell the woman, I said, "I didn't find anything, but let me go ahead and cleanse your house here. And then I'll go next door and do your other house. And we'll see if we could push some of this bad spiritual energy out of here." So she was for that. So me and my friend, we were going down in the basement, and she had a big basement, and it looked like something out of the Addams Family or the Monsters or something. There was a big basement, some stairs going down in the basement down in there. And I'll tell you the weird thing, Jeremy. Before I could get the holy water out, and I was taking the cross out, I stepped down went down about halfway down those stairs. Something hit us. I never even got a chance to say anything. Something hit us, and it was like a wind. Okay. And the guy I was with, I didn't see it. He said he saw like a shadow pass us. I felt the wind of it go by us. It was getting out of Dodge in a hurry. Okay. It wasn't even waiting around for me to throw it out. It got out of Dodge, and the moment the wind got past us, something upstairs went bam, real loud. I knew then it had left the premises because most of the time demons make a noise. They knock something over, they break something before they leave. That's just the way they do sometimes. And this thing was made a big noise when they left. They always like to leave dramatically for some reason. I don't know. But anyway, that's the way it works. And I knew then, I looked at the guy with me and I said, hey, I think we don't even have to do this because that thing left. And so I go back up and I said, I'm going to go ahead and finish everything. I went ahead and done what you usually do to cleanse an area spiritually. And then I went next door and did the other house and then prayed with them and anointed them and all that. And then I said, you got my number, call me back. If anything else happens, let me know how everything goes. So about a week later, she called back and she said, you are a wonderful person. I said, what do you mean? She said, I'm back to my old self. I'm doing dogs like crazy. The house feels good. Nothing's going on. She said, I said, don't think me. It wasn't me. But I said, I'm glad your problem is solved. But from now on, do not take anything from strangers, okay? Definitely not. But that was what we call a traditional vampire spirit, the demonic spirit that can inhabit people or their spaces, slowly draining the life out of them. And there's a life essence or sucking your soul or eating your soul, however you want to say that. That's what they're doing. So they're not like they're just living on your blood, that kind of vampire. That's what a vampire is, though. You got to remember this, whether it's taking blood or life essence or energy or whatever's going on, there are energy vampires out there that are people walking around that can actually do that. Whatever the situation, it's a parasite. They're parasitic like mosquitoes or leeches or bed bugs or ticks. They're parasites. They're living off of you, whatever form of nourishment they take. It may be. But the spiritual vampires like that feed off of you spiritually. That's the way they operate. But luckily her problem was solved and everything came out all right with that. But it was a very dramatic thing. That thing was getting out of Dodge in a hurry. I've never had one do that before or since. Evidently didn't like the holy water or something. I don't know. It's like that old saying we have among demonologists, like the devil hates holy water. It was definitely didn't want to stay around.
Yeah.
But those are the vampire spirits, and they can be just as deadly, just as dangerous as any other type of that. Luckily, she resolved her problem with that. But I've warned people over the years, Jeremy, do not let people touch you that you don't know. It is a well-known fact, and I can tell you this without doubt, witches and warlocks with evil intentions can actually whisper or speak a spell into their hand and touch you with it. And that puts a spell on you, okay? That is transferring. We call that spell, the energy or spell transference. That's what that is. And it can be transferred in different ways, by touching or by putting it in food or drink, or putting it on a gift that someone gives you. So be very careful with these things because you may be opening some very bad doors that you don't want to open. And one thing that we got to understand, I'll say this before we go on. We are born, all of us, even animals, have a personal space about us. I think it's like a spiritual bumper kind of a thing. I think we're built with this. And we get very uneasy when something or someone gets in that space, especially someone we don't like or someone we don't know or whatever. I've seen a lot of people have a bad habit of putting their hands on people while they're talking to them and all that. That's not good to do. And a lot of people don't like that. And there's a reason for that. Even animals don't want you in their personal space. So especially if you definitely won't do that with a bear on a bad day. I would not advise it. A lot of these things can be very dangerous, so it's not a good idea to let people hug you and even shaking hands. I had a bad experience shaking hands with someone one time like that. It was very freaky. It turned out that I was not shaking hands with a human being. And there can be some energy transference going on, and it goes both ways sometimes. It can be taking energy from you or putting bad energy on you. It can go either way. It's a two-way street like that. So you have to be very careful with that and understand that only let trusted people in your space, okay? And be careful what you bring into your life and bring things into your house. I'll tell you a quick story about that. There's a paranormal story, although it didn't have anything to do with a vampire, but it illustrates what we're talking about here. I had a lady call me one day and say, I lived in this house 20 years, never had any weird paranormal stuff, and all of a sudden, It's going crazy over here. The doors are opening, lights going on and all, cold spots. I said, "What's interesting?" I said, "Have you been playing around with witchcraft or anything?" He said, "No, I don't do anything like that. I never have done anything like that in my life." I said, "Have you got anything recently? Got anything brought into the house recently?" That she said, "No, no. Well, wait a minute." She said, "Yeah, I did buy a little love seat, little love sofa at a yard sale about a couple of weeks ago, and it's in the living room." I said, "Oh, that's interesting." I said, "Go back and find out some history on that piece of furniture." So about a week later, she called me back. She said, "How did you know?" I said, "What are you talking about?" She said, "I found out about that love seat." She said, "A man committed suicide on that love seat."
Oh.
I said, "Oh, that means you need to get a new love seat. Okay. You need to get that out of your house and get a new love seat, okay?" Which she promptly did, thank goodness. And that ended her problem. The paranormal stuff on the way. You be very careful what you bring into your life, what doors you open, spiritual or physical doors. These things are waiting for an invitation, just like the vampire. He's not going to come in unless you invite him, unless you open the door. But you would not be surprised, though, Jeremy, what these things consider an invitation sometimes. That's what you got to watch out for. Absolutely.
Will they
But
try to trick you, or is that will they try to trick you into inviting them in?
there are some people who have attachments too. Okay.
Yeah.
They have demonic attachments. They can be vampire spirits. They can bring them into your house and they will and leave them. The old proverbial demon monkey on your back kind of thing. If you have that kind of attachment, it can definitely cause other people trouble. I had that happen with a doctor one time. He had a actual attachment like that ended up being in his office. So you never know what spiritual baggage you may pick up out there if you're not careful. And so be very careful who you associate with. And if you have somebody you know that plays around a lot with witchcraft, Ouija board, doing junk like that, you better be very wary of them, okay? Because they can have trouble with them. They can wear trouble like a cheap perfume, as the old spy novels used to say. They definitely bear watching because they may not know, they may not realize what they're doing in that respect. But I've had that happen before. A lot of paranormal investigators have called me over the years. "Oh, I did something. I went out investigating at night. And now something's followed me home." I said, "You shouldn't have let that happen. You should be more professional and protect yourself going in and coming out of that situation. Because if you don't, you're asking for trouble."
Yeah.
Absolutely. Most of the time, I will go back and people look at you like you're crazy, but I will stop and turn back and say, "Okay, don't follow me. You have no permission to come with me. You stay here." And I'll walk off and leave it. That's what you got to do. And so if you ever get in that situation where you feel like there's something there, definitely address it and tell it. Don't give it permission. Take authority over it and say, "Look, you don't have the authority to go with me. You don't have my permission. I don't want anything to do with you. Stay here. You're not welcome," and all that. That usually will do the trick most of the time, unless it's something very malevolent. It will listen to you. And you need to be careful going in because you need to be protected spiritually going into a situation like that. And if you're paganistic and you don't believe in God and all that, you can envision sort of a white light around you or something to protect you. You need some kind of safety, whatever it may be. Very much like the American natives in the different tribes used to wear medicine bags. They believed that bag protected them and it had important stuff in it that they had a connection, emotional connection with, or a good connection with. That was what I have an Indian friend who gave me a medicine bag years ago like that. And that's a good idea. It's that your line of reasoning, and that's what you want to do with that. But anyway, the vampire is waiting for that invitation. He's an opportunist. And they're very much like the black-eyed children you hear about, which I think may be some type of vampire type thing. I don't know what's going on there. A lot of people think they're aliens. Yeah, a lot of people think they're aliens. A lot of people think they're hybrids. Whatever the situation is, when I heard that they want to be invited in, that's another red flag there. That sounds very spiritual. They're either some type of demonic entity or something like that going on with it. And there's been a lot of contention going on in the paranormal world right now about aliens and demons. But there have been many situations in the past where what was supposed to be alien entities turned out to be something other than what they were presenting themselves to be, which sounds very downright demonic to me because that's the way the demonic works. Don't ever forget, Jeremy, the D in demonic stands for deception. That's the way those guys work. They're very good at deceiving people. But anyway, getting back, I have another vampire case I'll share with you that was a very interesting thing that happened with me many years ago. I will say this was probably, it may be around 30 years ago that this happened. I was in the city of Charleston, South Carolina, and been there many times. A very haunted city. It's called the Holy City. I call it the Haunted City because it has a very interesting and unique history of piracy and slavery and all that other stuff that went back on in the past. And a lot of ghosts, so to speak, a lot of weird stuff going on. I've actually spent one night in the middle of downtown Charleston in a basement that looked like something out of a horror movie. And it was a pirate hangout pub that's one of the oldest pubs that still is in business in this country.
Yeah.
And it was a hangout for Blackbeard the pirate, by the way. And so that's how old this goes back. And I sat all night in the basement of this thing on a 16th century seawall that definitely Blackbeard had to cross to get there. But it was a very interesting, I'll have to tell you about that sometime. It was a very interesting night, definitely. But anyway, Charleston has a very interesting history in a lot of things. And I've had a couple of vampire type incidents there. But the most significant one, and I had been in there are two big churches downtown Charleston that have been there for the 16th century, very long time. And I was in one of those churches. I won't say which one, but I was in one of those churchyards or graveyards. Now, there's a difference, folks, between a graveyard and a churchyard. Okay. Graveyard can be any cemetery, but churchyard is a graveyard in a church setting. Okay. So that's a big difference. So this was a churchyard. And the reason I was in this churchyard, although I'm no stranger to them, I've gone in a lot of them over the years. I used to even teach classes in some of them. Okay. I was actually looking for one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. There were two of them buried there, and I had found one. I was looking for the other. That's what I was doing there that day. And it was an autumn day. It was overcast. I remember that. It was not sunshiny day. And it was late in the day. I'm going to say it was probably around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, somewhere like that. And there was nobody there but me. As far as I was at that moment, I was alone. I reckoned. I thought I was. And I was walking down looking. I finally found his grave. And I was very surprised because it didn't have much of a signer of the Declaration of Independence didn't even have much of a plaque on it. But I found it nevertheless. And I was meandering through the churchyard, and I stopped and I looked at a very interesting tombstone because tombstones can be like pages out of a history book sometimes. They can tell you of battles, hardships that people have gone through, and all so fascinating to walk to a cemetery is walking through history. And so I was looking into this very interesting. I think it was a 17th century tombstone, and somebody behind me said, "Oh, do you like graveyards?" And I turn around and there's this girl standing there. And I'm going to say girl, young woman, something like that. Probably, I would put her no more than 20, 22 years old, something like that. Young for me. And she was there, very pretty girl. I remember she had long, dark brown hair. And what struck me as strange, she was very pale looking. And she had on like a mixture of old and new clothes. She had on like a new dress or a skirt like and a bodice like over it, which was kind of old fashioned looking. And she was dressed very nice though. And she put her hand out and she said, "Hey, I'm Lori Ann," or I forget exactly what her name was, something like that. It was a hyphen like name. There's two names together. Beth Ann or Lori Ann, something like that. And I shook her hand, Jeremy, and that was immediately. I'll tell you this. I have touched a lot of dead people in my time. Okay. Being an ex-cop and all that. And the moment I took her hand, it was like, that's what immediately hit my mind. It's like shaking hands with a dead person.
Wow.
It was very cold. And it was not in the South, especially. It was an autumn day. It wasn't cold. It was rather warm. And that's all. And I just thought maybe she's got some kind of, hormonal problem or something. And I just brushed it off, but it was creepy. And she was nice. And I said, yeah, I spend a lot of time in graveyards or something like that. And she said, I do too. She said, as a matter of fact, I live here. I said, oh, that's interesting. What do you mean? You stay here a lot too or something? She said, no, I reside here. I'm a vampire. I'm in a crypt here. I said, really? That's interesting. And I'm getting to think there's something weird with this gal, definitely. And so I said, you mean you're a member of a vampire society? Because I know all the large cities have vampire societies. And she said, no, I'm a real vampire. I'm 189 years old. And I said, really? That's interesting. I said, what are you doing out in the daytime then? If you're a vampire, what are you doing out in the daylight like this? She said, oh, we can come out in daytime. We can walk in the daytime, especially on a cloudy day like this. We just don't like bright sunshine. But we can come out and walk around whenever we want to. I said, you learn something new every day. I didn't know that. And she said, we're not watching movies and reading books. She said, we're completely different. We're something else altogether. And I said, I started thinking maybe I could get distancing myself away from this woman. Something definitely wrong here. And I said, that's very interesting and all that. And I kind of looked down again at the tombstone because I'm kind of backing up a little bit and I don't want to fall over the tombstone. I turn around and look, and I turn back and look, and Jeremy, she's gone.
No.
She's not there. And I can see straight through this cemetery. And I said, what is she doing? I said, she's sneaking down behind a graveyard stone or what? So I started looking around for her. She's gone. And I see some people further on way back over outside the fence line, but it's not her. There was no way she could have got that far away from me that quick.
Yeah.
And I'm saying there, what the heck just happened here? What is this? And all of a sudden, I kid, now here's a clincher, okay? I'm thinking nobody's ever going to believe this, okay? That's the first thing that always comes to mind when you have an experience like that. And there's a movement, and I look up, and in the trees, going to the tree, the biggest bat I have ever seen in my life. It was the size of a hawk or an eagle kind of thing, okay? It was a big, and we do not have bats that big in the South, okay? This was a big bat. And it's flying through the trees in the daytime. I'm going, oh, God, nobody will ever believe this, okay? This is creepy. But here's the thing about this incident that made it even more strange because she was very pale looking. She was cold as death, definitely. She had a very strange eyes. And I never really looked into her eyes, just glanced at her, but I didn't make eye contact with her when I was talking to her. And why? I usually don't do that. I usually look at people's eyes when I talk to them. I make eye contact, and I didn't. And maybe it's a good thing I didn't. I don't know. But there was a very strange feeling about this girl that I remember that. I remember, I'm not going to say it was a vibration or whatever, but it was just a very odd feeling about it. But here's what happened. For the next 3 weeks after this, I had a dream every night. And this girl would be in the dream.
No.
But she would be like in the background walking down. She would not be the focus of the dream. You see what I'm saying? She would be in the dream walking through there. Or I remember one time I seen her that I dreamed. And this happened. This is really weird. I do not have dreams like that. But never had it before or since. The last time I seen her in a dream, she was like walking into a crowd of people or into a place or something. I forget exactly. But she turned and looked at me and said, I will see you again. I wonder, will I ever really see her again? I wonder about that. And if I do ever see her again, I will be a lot older, but I don't think she will have changed one single bit.
Yeah.
But was she a real vampire? I can't really tell you 100% for sure, but boy, she'll do till the real thing comes along. Definitely. Yeah.
Wow.
Now, I had another incident that happened years later after that in Charleston, where I was in a restaurant down there, and I met this young black girl who was the waitress. And I was with a group of people that we were down there doing a paranormal investigation. And I believe that night I had stayed all night on Ropemaker's Lane, which is supposed to be haunted by the shadow of a murdered pirate. And all by myself, it was very interesting night, but never saw the shadow, by the way. But anyway, I'm going to certify that not supernatural, more legend than anything else. Okay. But anyway, had been sitting at this restaurant talking, and they had left, and I was sitting there. I think I might have been finishing my food or whatever. And the black girl come up and sat down. She said, "I hear you guys talking about paranormal stuff." And she said, "I've always been interested in that." And I said, "Oh yeah, that's good. Have you got some questions or something?" And she said, "Really, I want to tell you about something." And I said, "Okay, yeah." And she said, "It's something my great grandmother told me many years ago." And my great grandmother and my mother know about this. Okay. And my mother told me, my great grandmother told my mother told me. That's what she said. And I said, "What is it?" I thought it was a family ghost story or something going on. Every family used to have a ghost story.
Yeah.
And I said, "Let me hear it. I'm always interested in listening to them." And she said, "My great grandmother was a maid in this house." She told me where it was. And it was an old plantation many years ago. It was right outside of Charleston. So it was an old plantation. But it had been sold off piece by piece, and it wasn't that much of it left except for the house and a little bit of the grounds. And she was the maid for this old lady, she said, that lived in the house. And the old lady lived with two daughters in the house. And they were like maiden daughters. They had never married, but they were in like she said these women looked like they were in their 20s. Okay. They were still young looking women, but they didn't have boyfriends. They didn't socialize. It was very strange. These people kept to themselves. The old woman in the house never went out. But the maid, her great grandmother was the maid. And this was like about at the turn of the 19th century, somewhere there, about like, 1890s or something like that. And he said that her grandmother was a maid there for about 30 years. And said he never saw the two girls but a few times. But they lived upstairs in this big old house, great big house. And the older lady, she stayed downstairs most of the time because she wasn't able to climb the stairs or something like that. Anyway, make a long story short, she said that the weird things went on in that house. And the great grandmother said that was really starting to think about getting a job somewhere else. She didn't want to stay there anymore, though she'd been there a long time. And the weird thing was the woman was getting older, but every time she ever saw the young girls, they never looked any different. And remember, this woman been there 20 or 30 some odd years, and these people did not change when she saw them. But she said they stayed upstairs. She said about every month or so, maybe a month and a half, a man would come to the house and deliver a goat, a live goat. And it would be a young goat, not a full-grown goat like what we used to call a billy goat, a young goat. He would deliver one to the house. And she said, "I know because I seen him do it every month, almost a month and a half. All the time, he would deliver these goats." And she said, "I even talked to the man one time. He was like a nearby farmer or something. He said, I don't know what she does with them, but I'll take the money for the goats and bring her to the goats. That's all I do. I don't worry about it." So she didn't get anything out of that. So she said, "What is the woman doing with this goat?" And said when the old lady would get the goat, she would take it into the kitchen and never say nothing else about it. Take it through the kitchen out in the back somewhere or something. And never say anything about that. And she said, "I never asked because I wanted to keep my job. I didn't want to get nosy and say I get fired for it." So she said, "I never asked, but she was never told me." I would look at her. She would never say anything about the goat. And he said, "But here's the weird thing." She said, "Within a couple of days, I would hear the goat, but it would be upstairs. I'd hear it bleeding upstairs. It was no longer downstairs, upstairs with the girls." Okay. Now, what is this beginning to sound like to me? I'm going, oh, wait a minute. There's something really, are they sacrificing goats? There's something else going on here. And here's the clincher to it all. Said that she came in one day, and it was early in the morning, and she was going to get her maid duties started and all that. And she found the old woman, in the living room, sitting in the chair, dead. She had passed away during the night or something, but she was still sitting in this chair. And so the maid, when she found her, she immediately notified the authorities. And I think the police came and they said the woman probably died of old age or some whatever. She's probably in her 90s or something like that. And then the woman thought about the two daughters upstairs. And she said, "Oh, well, we need to tell the daughters. She's got two daughters." And one of the policemen said something very strange. So I've been in this district a long time. I've known this house here. I never saw two daughters here. What are you talking about? There's two daughters. I've only known the old woman to be here. And she said, "Oh, no, I've seen these daughters off and on over the years. There's two of them. They live upstairs. Let's go get them." So they go upstairs. And she said they get to one room. And there's two rooms that they figured out. One daughter lives in one room and one in the other, two bedrooms together. And they opened the door and go in and said, the weird thing is, in both of these rooms, the beds have cobwebs on them. Nobody's ever slept in these beds, as you can tell. Where are these girls sleeping at? Where are they living at? They go through all the rooms upstairs. This is the only two rooms that could be the bedrooms of these girls. And said when they walked in there, they looked like stepping back in the past, 30 years. Back in the past, or 40 years, a long time back, because nothing was changed. There was no modern looking stuff in here. It was like a dollhouse kind of a thing. And the beds had not been touched. There was dust that thick on the beds, you know. Where did these girls? And here's the weird thing. The old lady says, the only thing they could come up with, they look for the girls. They're nowhere around. They never find them. Okay. She leaves. She goes home, never goes back because she got paid the last time. That was it. And that was the end of the whole thing. I think the estate paid her what she would owe, and that was it. She never went back to the house after that. And she didn't live there. She just worked there.
Yeah.
So anyway, said the only way they could figure out was that those two girls were vampires of some sort. They were feeding on those goats. And the old woman was keeping them there as long as she was alive, giving them these goats. They're letting them drain the blood of these goats. And they said that she had even told the police, maybe we should dig out in the back and see if we can find the bodies of these goats or whatever they're doing with it. And he said, I'm not going to mess with that. He didn't want to do it. It was a shut and closed case to him. Okay. He wasn't going to investigate it. But that was what she did say to him, and that was the last thing. But the whole thing, what was going on with the goats? And what were they doing with the goats? Were they living on the blood of this goat? Because she said, I never took them dinner. I never eat anything. I never saw them except once in a while. And she said when they walked through the halls, they were like ghosts. They were just quiet and they never talked. They never laughed and went on. They were not normal people.
Yeah.
And that was what really disturbed her great-grandmother. Okay. And she said that her great-grandmother said, what were they, vampires or ghosts? What were they? And the goat was the clue. Were they living on the blood of this goat? And while she was alive, she was keeping them there. But once she died, they were gone. Are they still out there somewhere? And are they definitely not dining on goats anymore, if that's the case? But here's a clincher for this. I said, I got to go to this house and see this house, okay? I would love to went in it. But unfortunately, it was privately owned. And in Charleston, you don't usually go up, knock on people's doors and ask to come in their house. But I did go in one like that one time, and I got invited in. But anyway, I went to this place, and it is a creepy-looking, plantation-looking mansion kind of thing. And it had a brick wall around it, Jeremy, around the outskirts of it. Because, like I say, it was probably once a very big plantation at one time. But anyway, they had a lot of moss hanging off of it. It was a weird, spooky-looking place. And I found something very interesting, though, although I didn't get to go in the house. On the wall, not about halfway down, about so big, maybe 3 inches, was a mark. And it was in red. And what it was, a red V, like the letter V, and a red X through it. And I remember writing that down in my notebook because I copied it down exactly what it looked like. We didn't have a cell phone with me at that time to take pictures of it. I wrote it down, and I still have it in my old notebook. So I did some research on that. I said, what is this? What is it? And it was in red now. But the V and the X. I come to find out exactly what that was. It is a vampire hunter's mark, and it
Oh.
means there are no vampires present.
Oh.
That was an interesting little ending to that situation.
Yeah. Yeah. That is
But I want to, yeah, bring that up. I once talked to a 200-year-old werewolf, and he said he was a 200-year-old werewolf. I think, yeah, about 200 years old. I asked him, I said, "Are you going to live forever? You're a werewolf. You're 200 years old and you're going to live forever. How long do you live? Are you immortal?" And he said, "I really don't know, but I've lived 200 years." But he said, "Only stupid werewolves don't live that long because there are people out there hunting them." And that kind of opened my eyes. If that is true, then there are werewolf hunters out there, and there definitely are vampire hunters out there. I found that out. What's going on with that? Is there some kind of dark underworld of vampire hunters and werewolf hunters out there doing their job that we don't know about? That's strange. If they are, if any of them's watching, please contact me. Okay. I'd like to talk with you about that. But that was strange. But now I've had some interesting cases related to vampire type activity like that over the years. And one of the most interesting ones that I had was with this. I was contacted one day by a young lady, and she wanted me to meet her at a nearby restaurant. I used to meet a lot of people to make them feel better in public places.
Yeah.
And if you ever do meet someone to interview them, it's good to do it in a public place. So I met her at a restaurant, and she had said she had seen me on TV. I forget what show she'd seen me on, and she'd seen me on TV, and she said, "I've got a problem with my mother." I said, "Oh, what is that problem?" She said, "My mother is coming to me at night in my dreams, and she is not acting like my mother." And she said, "And I buried my mother 2 weeks ago. And every night since I buried my mother, she's come to me in a dream. And she's acting very strange. She says, my mother and I never got along. My mother was a mean and evil and vindictive woman. Okay." She said, "We never got along. My mother hated everybody." Okay. That's just the way she was. She's a very mean person. And that, by the way, that's one criteria for coming back as a vampire. If you're very evil, you usually do that. And she said, "My mother's coming back. My mother was never demonstrative. She never hugged me or done, even shook my hand or anything. But yet in the dream, she's putting her arm around me. She's putting her head down on my chest and getting close to my neck." And when I wake up in the morning, I'm just drained. I feel like I haven't slept at all at night. And this has been happening every night since I buried her. And one of the things she said, my mother stayed with me till she died. She had terminal cancer, and she requested to stay with me, and because I was her only child, that's what she said. And I said, "Sure, mother, I'll take care of her." She took care of her. She was a real sweet girl. And said, "I'll take care of you." And the mother asked for one thing. He said, "No matter what, I want to be buried in a white satin dress that I got, that I've always had for a long time. I want to be buried in that." So she said, "I promised you, mother, you will be buried in that." And she said, "Last night I had the dream again. And that's when I decided to call you." She said, "The dream again, and I woke up with no energy, very lifeless. I feel worse today than ever since the 2 weeks thing started. But today I found a piece of cloth on the floor." And she had it with her. She gave it to me. She said, "I swear this is off of that white dress that I buried my mother in." And that she remembers her wearing this white dress in the dreams. Okay.
Oh.
So I still have it somewhere. Matter of fact, she gives to take it. I don't want it. I don't want it around me anymore. Take it away. And I said, "Do you think your mother is coming back?" She said, "What do you think?" I said, "Well, sounds like it. She's coming back and feeding off of you in some weird spiritual kind of way." I said, "That sounds very much." And the girl finished my sentence, "The vampire." I said, "Yes, that's what it sounds like. And since your mother you described herself as evil and very vindictive," I said, "usually sometimes that's one of the criteria for coming back as a vampire. Suicide's another aspect of it." I said, "I'll tell you what I will do." And she told me where she was buried. She was buried in an above ground crypt. She told me where she was buried, and I said, "Look, I will go there. And for the next 7 nights, I will stake that place out and see if she comes out of that grave or whatever's going on. I see her or something. So for 7 long nights, Jeremy, I sat out in this graveyard alone by myself and waiting to see a vampire. Okay. And about the middle of the week, sure enough, I see something white moving out there in the graveyard, moving around in the cemetery. And I said, this looks D-Day here. So I go walk out there with a flashlight, and it's a big white dog sits there. Big dog, like a German Shepherd looking white dog. But usually, I'm going to say this about it. Usually, I'm an animal person. Animals come up to me, and this dog just sat there very strangely, just looking at me. He just sat there looking at me. And I called it to me, wouldn't come. He sat there looking. I said, this is very weird. Is she coming back as a dog or what? What's going on with that? That was very strange. But finally, the dog walked off. But I never saw her. Okay. I contacted the girl. I said, look, I haven't seen anything. She's still going on. The dreams are still going on. Yeah. And I'm about to go crazy. I'm going to have some relief here. I said, let me tell you, with your permission, there's something I can do. She said, I don't care what it is. You do it. I said, okay. So I go back to the woman's crib there, and I have some blessed chalk. And I put a cross on it, and I say a prayer, and then I speak to the woman. I call her by name. I think her name was Estelle, something like that. I said, Estelle, you have no place left on this planet, on this earth. There's no need for you to stay here. Your daughter doesn't want you to go on. I want you to go on. You need to go on to where you need to go. You don't need to come back. You don't need to bother. I said, you cannot go past this point, Estelle. I said, I have marked this tombstone. You cannot go past this point. So don't go back and bother your daughter anymore. This is it. I spoke like that, said another prayer, threw some holy water on it, and left. Next day, I get a call. The girl said, what did you do yesterday? I said, I told you I was going to do something. She said, I don't know. I don't care what it was. Every day they worked because I slept all night long. I woke up refreshed this morning, no dreams or anything. She said, thank you. Thank you for whatever you did. I said, I'm glad I was able to help you. And I think maybe your problem is solved now. We're good. And it was. I never heard back from her. She never had any more problems with that. But that was very strange. That was a spiritual, like, vampire type thing going on with that. But speaking of graveyards, reminds me of another incident that was strange that happened in a graveyard. And I had heard about this man, and he was supposed to be a very evil warlock. He was also a black man that lived, I think, probably about 40 miles from where I'm at right now. And he had been buried in this graveyard out there. And his story was he was a very evil warlock, and he was a vampire. People said he was some type of vampire. He was just evil. Okay. And here's the interesting thing, Jeremy. He told them, when you bury me, I don't want any prayers said over me. I hate God. I don't want anything to do with God. Don't say any prayers over me. Put me in the ground. And that's it. And so that day they did that. They were just out by the graveside while they getting ready to cover him up or whatever. They had already covered the grave, I think. And it was standing there getting ready to leave. And all of a sudden, this bad, very bad thunderstorm comes up. It's out of nowhere. Thunderstorm, as soon as they got this guy buried, and I'm going to tell you something interesting about that in a minute. Okay. As soon as the guy got buried, this thunderstorm comes up and lightning hits. They all run. They leave the graveyard. But while they're leaving, lightning strikes his grave. And it puts a big crack in his tombstone. Because they told me about this. I call this the lightning struck vampire story. Okay. This is what happened with that. And they told me about this. Said, you need to go see this. This is really weird. And there is a folklore that a very evil person, when they are born, thunderstorm will come up, lightning strikes their grave. That means that even God was very angry at them or something. He didn't want them in his earth, in other words, kind of a thing. And that's what supposedly these people were saying. This vampire, this black guy, was so evil that even God didn't want him buried in the earth, okay? And they say that, according to legend, people like that should be cremated, definitely. Their ashes should be scattered. So that ends the evil, in other words. So I said, hey, I got to go check this out. And so it was like about 15, 20-minute drive and all that. So I go out there, and sure enough, it's got a crack in it. And it looks like lightning struck it or something. It's very weird looking. There's a chip out of it and some kind of Georgia marble. That's very tough stuff, okay? And it's got a crack in it. And that you can tell that's not a naturally occurring crack. Granite doesn't do that. Or marble. It might have been more like marble because I remember it has smooth-like surface to it. So anyway, I said, dang, I didn't bring a camera. I wanted to take a picture of it. And things being what they were, I had a job and all that going on. It was about 2 weeks later when I went back. When I went back, I was disappointed because they had replaced the tombstone. So I never got a picture. I wanted a picture of that, but that was very interesting, but a very strange story. He hated God. Evidently, God wasn't too pleased with him either.
No.
So,
I don't like it.
yeah, but that was very strange. But that is one of the, I said about the woman, the frequency of being a vampire. If you're, the more evil you are, like I don't know if you're familiar with the story, the Abhartach. The Abhartach was definitely a story in Ireland that Bram Stoker heard about before he ever wrote Dracula. I'm sure he heard about it, and that's what gave him the idea for a vampire story. But the Abhartach was a very evil lord, Irish lord, and he was a dwarf, by the way. But he was just evil on two legs. People hated his guts. He hated people too. There was no love lost between any of them. And when Abhartach died, he came back as a vampire and was biting people, taking out buckets of blood more. And so people kept saying they went and dug him up and drove a stake in him. That's part of the process. They didn't finish it, but they put a stake in him, reburied him. He kept coming back. So finally, they got a professional vampire hunter about time that they did that. And they said, what are we doing wrong here? He keeps coming back, bothering people, biting people, milkmaids' necks, and doing bad stuff, and running rampant through the neighborhood. And you don't want vampires in the neighborhood. They run your property value down real quick, yeah. So anyway, the vampire hunter says, you're doing this wrong. You got to cut his head off and then bury him upside down, head first in the ground, and put a big rock over him, which they did. And Abhartach has stayed there ever since. But if you ever go to Ireland and see the vampire's grave, they will tell you under no circumstances can you remove that rock. Okay? So they might go back. But that's a very interesting story. And I'm sure Bram Stoker heard about that. As a matter of fact, I interviewed Bram Stoker's nephew, Dacre Stoker, really nice guy. And we talked about that. So definitely, he probably heard that story in childhood and knew about that. The vampire is a fascinating thing. And I'll just say this, Jeremy. Like I said, there are satanic vampires. These are people who want to be. I've actually had people come to me and say, Dr. Carroll, I want to become a vampire. How can I become a vampire? Well, some had people ask me, want to be a werewolf. I said, I don't think you want to do that.
No.
That's not a good idea. First off, you have to trade your soul for it. And you give yourself completely to the darkness of the evil supernatural powers that be to become these things. But once you become them, you can't go back. There's no point of return on this. And I'm not going to tell them because I don't definitely want their soul or their blood on my hands. I'm definitely going to find out somebody else. I'm not going to participate with that. But it can be done. And it is a satanic agreement that you go into. And it gives you the ability to shapeshift. And what you're doing when you turn into a werewolf or vampire, you're, of course, shapeshifting, turning into something else altogether. These are satanic properties. Witches do this. Witches can turn into werewolves. Witches can turn into bats. They can turn into vampires, whatever they want to turn into zombies, whatever you want to do. You can shapeshift. Supernatural beings do that. I'm doing a lecture series on Saturday nights about supernatural beings, by the way. And it's gotten very interesting. But that's one of the abilities of dark witchcraft. And once you become, say, if I were a witch and I want to become a vampire, I'll become an actual vampire, like the living dead. Although I'm still a human being, slowly I'm becoming a vampire until I really am no longer a living human being. I am now an undead vampire, and I have become completely demonic. You understand? I'm no longer human in that respect. But now the people that play around with this, they'll join the vampire societies and all that, they're still human beings. They're just playing around with it. Some of them may be attracted to drinking each other's blood. They have parties, they have blood parties, they drink each other's blood, and they've got what they call safe partners. You got your own partner that you give and take blood from and all that. That's them. They're not the real deal. Okay. The real deal are the undead vampires. They have cults, by the way. They have covens of undead vampires. They exist in this way. Yeah, those are the guys you don't want to mess with because they will unalive you in a very bad way. They will do you in very bad. If you threaten them in any way, exposing them or whatever, I call them the vampire mafia. That's what they are, basically. And they are into a lot of evil crime stuff, okay? But they're they will live for a long time unless somebody unalives them that way. They are here. And here's the thing about the real vampire. Let's say I were a vampire and you were a woman. I could get you to be attracted to me, even though I look like one over death. I can use the glamour on you and make you see me as drop dead gorgeous, something you'd be very attracted to. They do this with their victims. Okay. They use this glamour on them. It's like a magic. And it is actually screwing with somebody's reality, getting them to see you in a different way than what's really there. Okay.
Yeah.
It's very dangerous. It's very much, and they do use mesmerism. They can hypnotize. And that's why I said it was probably a good thing I did not look that girl in the cemetery in the eyes. Okay. She might have been sizing me up for a victim and finally said, this guy's not doing what I want to do. I'm just going to go and find somebody else. Maybe that was it. Or why she says she will see me again one day. But anyway, whatever the situation, you got to be careful dealing with vampires because you're on very unknown rocky ground. You never know what they're going to do to you mind-wise or physically or spiritually because they're operating on 3 different levels here: mental, physical, and spiritual. And that makes them some of the most dangerous creatures of all that you could run into or experience. You got to remember one thing about them is if they are as old as some of them appear to be, like that werewolf said, only stupid werewolves get killed. That goes with vampires too. Okay, so they're incredibly old. The older they get, the smarter they are. The more they learn, the more they know. So they've got an advantage over us that we have to be very careful about. They have a supernatural advantage in that respect. And if they can turn into a mist or a wolf or a bat or whatever they want to do, they're shapeshifters.
Yeah.
And that is the big part of the vampire legend. They can shapeshift. They can approach you in different ways. So you have to be very careful with what you're dealing with. Can they definitely come after you in dreams? Yes. Oh, without a doubt, I'm sure they could because there's a spiritual side of them as well. And whenever you deal with something that can manifest from the spiritual, as a doctor of metaphysics, I've studied my whole life the seen and the unseen aspects of this universe. And if something can manifest from the spiritual into the physical, that makes them double dangerous. They're dangerous spiritually, and then when they get into the physical mode, they're even more dangerous because now they can really do stuff to you. Okay. Yeah. More so than the spiritual. Okay. But like I've said, and I've compared this before in the past, if you want to say like a human spirit has enough power maybe to move a piece of paper, maybe at its best. The demonic spirit, however, can throw that table the paper's on at you. It can throw it across the room through a wall if you want it to. They have that much power to them. And so what you're dealing with is demonical here, whether it be vampire, werewolf, whatever the situation. You got to understand what you're dealing with is completely inhuman. And it's a different ball game altogether with them.
Yeah.
You're dealing with a different thing, all completely different subject when you deal with them. And you never know how it can approach you and come after you. But I will say this about the vampire in the end. The vampire is fascinating because he is a mirror image. He is us, only the worst version of us as you could think of possibly to be, whether it's human or inhuman vampire.
Yep.
That's the way that goes, definitely. But let me say this. If you, having done a little vampire hunting of my own, I've had people ask me over the years, would I do what you got to do to a vampire? If it's a real 100% vampire, I would decapitate them, stake them, decapitate them, and emulate them. So that's the only way you take care of them. But I got to know it's the real thing, okay? I wasn't going around doing that to just anybody.
Yeah.
But if I were forced to do that, yes, I would probably do that. That's part of the vampire hunting thing, but I don't usually do that proclaim. I don't do that as a hobby or anything else for that matter. But if I had to, I would. But I hope I never have to.
No,
But
not.
the interesting thing about the vampire is that, like I said, he is a shadow of us. And that's what makes him so incredibly dangerous. He's not just a supernatural being. He thinks like we do. And he has a mind like we do. That makes him, therefore, the most dangerous of cryptids out there. There are some more dangerous, but he is one of the most dangerous, definitely, that you would encounter. And if you ever do encounter them, call somebody that knows what to do and what they're dealing with. That's what you need, whether it's me or whoever it might be. You might better call somebody, okay? Because that vampire might have your number if you're not careful. But do the smart thing.
Yeah. It's been we're a little past the hour now, but it's been a fascinating. You've had some great encounters, and I think you've informed us quite a bit on different aspects of the vampire. And I thank you for sharing all your knowledge. But yeah, I thank you for coming on tonight, and we will have to do this again. I know we've been making this kind of a regular thing, which is great. And for everyone out there, if you enjoyed tonight's conversation, make sure you subscribe, hit that bell button so you get notifications for each of the episodes. And until next time, the history books close, but some stories refuse to end. Keep exploring the shadows, and I'll see you next Saturday night.